Hey, everybody. Welcome to our latest episode of Autism Confidential, the podcast from the National Council on Severe Autism. I'm Jill Escher, I'm the president of NCSA, and I'm very happy to be your host today. But I'm even more happy to be interviewing today somebody who is truly amazing. I really mean this, one of the most intelligent people I've ever come across in my life, one of the best writers, one of the most articulate people around difficult social issues I've ever met. And she's only an undergrad, which is amazing. So I can't even imagine, her name will be in lights, when she's older. But I welcome to this podcast, Lucy Kross Wallace, an undergraduate at Stanford University. Hey, Lucy.
Hello. Thank you for all the nice compliments.
Oh, and they're very, very heartfelt and very meant. So Lucy, you can find her on our blog. She has written for us before about the neurodiversity movement and about her perspective on it as somebody who's been diagnosed with autism and who has herself, been part of the neurodiversity movement. But Lucy is a very analytical person, a very independent thinker, as I think you will discover. And I think you'll really enjoy what she has to say. So Lucy, could we just start? Can you tell people a little bit about yourself, about your diagnosis, your experience with autism, your experience with neurodiversity, and then we'll launch into some questions.
Yeah, that sounds good. So let's see. I was diagnosed with autism, with high functioning level 1 autism. I like the term Asperger's for, I guess, reasons we can discuss later. But I was diagnosed when I was 18, and this came after many years of pretty severe mental illness and professionals not really understanding or knowing how to help me, or thinking they knew how to help me and then being very wrong about that. So it was not an easy process, and the diagnosis took so long because high functioning autism in girls is not super well understood, and I masked the symptoms without even realizing it for a while. So long story short, at 18, I got this diagnosis and everything started to make sense. And it was a really useful framework for understanding myself, and also moving forward in my life, because at that time I had been in hospitals for almost a year and it wasn't looking like I would get out anytime soon, but the autism diagnosis helped the professionals, the doctors, and my parents find better ways to support me and enable me to leave the hospital and go to college, which was pretty amazing. So all of that was really good. And in kind of my first year of college, I started to get more and more into neurodiversity advocacy. And I think I found a lot of good things there. I think there are a lot of good things. I found people who shared my experiences. I found just more ways to understand myself, specific aspects of Asperger's that I didn't even realize were part of the disorder. And suddenly I felt understood. It was just such a relief for things to finally be clear after such a long struggle. But there were also a lot of not so great elements. And one of the prevailing narratives, I guess, in this neurodiversity world is the social model of disability, that disability is like a social construct, I guess you could say, that people are disabled by society, that no one is inherently disabled. And when it's expressed that way, it sounds ridiculous. There's a kernel of truth in that society can make things more or less accessible to people with disabilities. But that idea is a lot easier for me to say as someone with high functioning autism, because I'm easier to accommodate for society, whereas people with more severe autism, that framework just doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. But the parts of the neurodiversity movement I was getting involved in endorsed this very black and white thinking where, you need to accept autism and love autism. And if you ever try to treat or cure autism, you're basically a murder. That's genocide. You're evil. A lot of very extreme black and white thinking, a lot of concern about ableism and using the right words, and how dare you call someone a person with autism because you think that autism isn't part of who they are, and a lot of other kind of extreme and irrational ideas that I can go into in more detail if you want me to.
Oh, yes, yes, we will.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you found yourself a freshman at Stanford and you found this camaraderie, right, in this movement, and you saw good things in it. I see good things in it too. But you also saw this bad side, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, what drove you to become a critic of the overall movement?
So I'd clarify one thing. I actually don't think I saw the bad side. I think I saw the things that I later realized were unproductive. But at the time, it felt very good to be like crusading against the ableism of the world and to have a mission in life. And I was getting a lot of reinforcement because college campuses are there's a lot of interest in what's called social justice. I'm not sure how often that actually aligns with what I would define as justice, but being an activist and having the cause is very fashionable. So the reason I became a critic is because the neurodiversity kind of people, it's part of this bigger world of the term I would use is critical social justice. And it can get pretty theoretical, but a form of social justice based on critical theory, based on the idea that kind of social injustices involve societies being divided into like the oppressors and the oppressed, and oppression is maintained through language and through knowledge and through there's a lot of like postmodern stuff about knowledge being more constructed than objective. So it gets pretty complicated, but basically neurodiversity is one of those pieces, and it goes along with perspectives on gender and race and colonialism and all this stuff. So as I was telling people like, you can't talk about autism because you haven't experienced it, and you need to use these very particular words, and you can't like that TV show because it's not good representation. People in my circle would do that, but then I also had to do the same for them when they told me that, you know, because I'm white, I'm never going to understand race, and I should never kind of talk or think about it, but I also should talk and think about it a lot because otherwise I'm a bad person. A lot of things like that. And in the early summer of 2020, when George Floyd was killed and there were a lot of Black Lives Matter protests, my Tumblr feed, where I was engaging with all of this neurodiversity stuff, was just flooded with these posts about donate to 25 bail funds or else you're an awful person, and here are 2,453 things you need to do to be like on the right side of history. And I just couldn't, I was so overwhelmed with guilt. And so then I started looking for alternative perspectives. And at first I changed my mind in terms of how to address racial issues productively. And then I started reflecting on the neurodiversity movement and seeing how engaging in it had made me much more narrow-minded, very fragile, not very open to other perspectives, kind of the exact opposite of what I really wanted to be doing.
Yeah, and opposite of what you would expect from somebody in a university setting, right?
For
Where
sure.
You're not supposed to just adopt a dogma, but you're supposed to be learning and absorbing, you know, new ideas and thinking independently and thinking critically. So you started writing about it, right? You started writing about it, and how were your writings kind of taken by the broader movement? Were you an instant pariah? Did you get hate mail? Like, what happened?
So I've written a fair number of controversial pieces now. I don't have social media. I think that helps a lot. I think if I were on Twitter, I would probably be getting a lot of messages from people I don't know who don't like what I've written. My email is pretty easy to find. Stanford emails are easy to find. The direct emails I've gotten have only been positive. I think there are sometimes like people, not even as much about the autism stuff, but when I've written about like the Black Lives Matter movement and J.K. Rowling, I just did a piece on that. I've seen, my friends have shown me like people discussing me on anonymous message boards and explaining how I'm a terrible person. I don't think I've met any of them. So they have a remarkable degree of insight. So there is pushback, but it's tolerable. And there are also a lot of people who have come up to me well, not physically, but who have approached me and said, I am on the spectrum and I also don't agree with this stuff, or I share your opinion. I don't feel like I can speak up, but I'm glad that you did. So I get quite a bit of positive feedback. It's just maybe not as visible as the like anonymous forum messaging people.
That's amazing that you're not on social media, because I think almost everybody your age, is on social media. But is that difficult to not be on social media, or do you find it liberating? I mean, obviously you don't spend your time, doom scrolling through all these comments.
Yeah, I'm glad. When I was on Tumblr, I felt like my life was becoming a bit of a performance, because I just don't want to be thinking about how can I capture this moment for my 17 followers. I also it feels like gross to be on social media and looking at people's lives and like all the way you're kind of forced to present yourself. It just didn't feel good. And now I think about it, like I don't use social media for the same reason I don't smoke. It's a health risk in my mind. And I also know that I'm like a very anxious person, that I've experienced depression in the past. I don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize my mental health any further.
Yeah, and it
So
really
that's kind of my
can.
thinking.
I mean, I've been involved in autism advocacy for quite a long time, and so I've had the dog piles, on Twitter.
Yeah.
When I like use the wrong word or say something innocuous, but it's taken the wrong way, and it's like, yeah, I mean, you can spend days, going through these ridiculous comments. And you're right. What's amazing is they don't directly email, they don't directly talk to me, but they'll say all these outrageous things on Twitter. And I think that's probably what happened with you. Like, they're performing on Twitter, but they don't really care about talking to you. Yeah, it's amazing. So I want to go back to something you said. You said that you are now diagnosed with level 1 autism, but you prefer Asperger's. Now, you probably know that terminology in autism is a very fraught issue.
Yes.
And diagnostic labeling, and National Council on Severe Autism has come out and said, we think we really need to recategorize, right, some of these disorders. Because I look at you, Lucy, and you're such an amazing person and so capable, so intelligent. And I have a daughter who's a little bit younger than you. She's almost 16, and she's nonverbal. She'll never read a book. She'll never understand a single one of these 3-syllable words that you use, right, fluently. Yeah. She will never be able to, go, not even go to college. She wouldn't even be able to pass first grade. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm trying to figure out why Lucy and my Sophie are in the same diagnostic category. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. The Venn diagram, like the overlap would be so small. What do you think about this? What is your perspective on labels? I think we spend so much time on the abstraction of autism rather than the functional capacities and the functional, abilities, the actual realities of people. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, no, the way you framed it, that's exactly what I think about, that like Sophie and I have totally different experiences, and like, why are we in the same category? I think it makes it so that like I can talk about autism and you can talk about autism, but because we're talking about such different things, the word almost loses its meaning. I think in a lot of the neurodiversity advocacy too, I think some of the people involved don't quite grasp that when they say like autism isn't a disability, I don't know, they're against the phrase different ability, but when I think it could be true for one person that their experience of autism isn't XYZ, but then it doesn't generalize. And I also think like if you look at other disorders, if you look at like bipolar disorder, everyone with that diagnosis has depressive episodes and manic or hypomanic episodes. I don't even know what the unifying factor for autism is. There are like the 3 criteria that are really, really broad, like repetitive behavior can mean so many different things. I would bring Asperger's back. I also think that the level 1, 2, 3 thing is not particularly helpful. I know they're working on dimensional models of other disorders, and I think that could be really interesting to kind of categorize and diagnose based on different areas. So like neuromotor deficits, information processing, sensory, I'm forgetting other specifics, but something like that. But I definitely agree that we need a better diagnostic label, or we need multiple labels, because it's so hard even to talk about when autism means so many things.
Yeah, I wish you were on the DSM committee. I'm going to nominate you.
Working toward it.
Are you? What can I ask? Like, what do you want to be when you grow up, Lucy? What are you aiming towards with your studies?
I want to be a clinical psychologist. So I don't know if I want to. I'm right now. I'm thinking I want to work with personality disorders because there's just a lot that needs to be done in that area. But I think that I have 2 more years in college and then 5 years of a PhD program before I need to decide. So that may change.
Yeah. That's well. That would be, we'd love to have you in the field of psychology, Lucy. It would be great, and we can't wait to read your books on it. You're such a good writer. I mean, you know that you could have a career just as a writer. You're an absolutely brilliant writer. I mean,
thank you. I do love writing. I'm going to do it no matter what else I do.
Okay. Yeah. You promise me you're going to write a book about autism, any kind of autism. It's okay. So let's also talk about this idea about this neurodiversity movement being just part and parcel of a much larger kind of critical theory, social justice movement. Mm-hmm. And it always, what you said earlier, I think is so profoundly important. It seems grounded in this idea of no objective truth, no biological truth, and everything is somehow constructed and relative, right? We make up reality, by using language. So if we change our language, we can change reality, right? This to me, just like the way my brain works, makes no sense. To put it kindly, right? It makes no sense. I look at my children who can't talk, who can't function at higher than a third grade or a 3-year-old level. My son's 23, Sophie, as I said, is almost 16. And I think, how could there be a more obvious example of profound disability, right, than my kids who cannot function, right? And who are condemned to a life of complete dependence. To me, this is not something to celebrate. This is not, neurodiversity, neurodivergence. This is a serious biologically based brain disorder, right? That has actual physical roots, right, in how their brains were wired up. That's how I see it. And I cannot, although I do think, I think we can talk about this, I think neurodiversity is an important concept because it does reframe people's challenges in a positive way. And I actually am a huge fan of that. But it has its limits, right? It doesn't mean that it's all good or natural, or that it should not be treated or not be prevented. Can you talk more about this, Lucy? Where did this come from? It just seems to me so ideologically driven and not based in reality.
Yeah, I think that, so there's a lot to break down. I think part of, honestly, if you look at the larger voices in the neurodiversity movement, when someone makes the argument that you just did, or just points out the basic fact that some people are profoundly disabled by autism, they have a handful of cases of people who were initially thought to be very severely autistic, and then had access to this technology and were more capable than people expected, which is great for them, but also not the point. That those are just a few exceptions that they cherry pick and continuously point to. And then I think there's also just the strategy of shutting down anyone who tries to talk about a version of a kind of autism they don't want to see. I think, I guess those are the ways I would say maybe the radical neurodiversity movement maintains maintains this fiction of like autism being this just great version of different, but not a problem. In terms of this like postmodern language constructs reality, that the best analysis of that I've read is the book Cynical Theories by James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, and they go into all of the kind of the postmodern roots and how this started to inform activism and how this activism then entered academia and then the mainstream. I'm not sure if I could synthesize it super well, but there's definitely a lot there in terms of how we got to this point.
Yeah, there was a book that came out, I don't know what year it was, 2015 maybe, called Neurotribes. Have you ever read that?
I read it right when I was diagnosed. It seemed like it was kind of is it the like autism is natural and therefore good argument? Or...
Yeah, I was a big critic of the book. I came out swinging with a very negative book review of it. But it was a very popular book, super popular book. It was very widely read. And it basically, its thesis is autism's always been here. It's perfectly natural. It's just neurodiversity. It's all genetic. It hasn't increased in prevalence. It's just, we're relabeling it. We used to call it something else. I don't know what. And now we're calling it autism. It was like putting fuel on the fire for people who wanted to see autism as a difference. It very much empowered the neurodiversity movement. It became the Bible of the neurodiversity movement. But I think it was a pack of lies, right? The book was basically a concoction. It was a fictionalized account of history in order to kind of justify this dogma. I remain a strong critic of the book and of Steve Silberman, the author, to today. But it shows the power, right, of literature, right, to inform a movement. And we need other literature that's actually based in fact and based in reality.
That's also a textbook example of the naturalistic fallacy. I can think of like dozens of natural things that are objectively bad.
Yeah. I mean, is it really a good thing that, I get emails every day from families, whose kids are, shredding their homes and, hitting, their parents and running outside naked. Are those things to celebrate? If anything's an inherent disability, it's definitely, in the world of severe autism. I want to ask you something personal, like how is your mental health? I mean, you've been through a lot. You just told us you were in the hospital for quite a long time and you had several kind of diagnoses along the way. I want to ask you, Lucy, how are you doing?
I'm doing reasonably well. Thank you for asking. I have, the Asperger's diagnosis really was the key to good treatment and understanding myself. And so I've gotten much better at, I learned the word alexithymia, not knowing emotions. So I started learning how to identify emotions and then figure out what to do with them. That was a whole nother thing, but still working on that. I have a really great therapist and psychiatrist who've known me for a while and are really supportive. I don't know that I would have thought I'd go to a college like a mile from my house, but that worked out nicely. And I also am hopefully going to have a service dog sometime soon. So that should be exciting.
Okay.
I think getting out of the neurodiversity movement and just the radical social justice definitely helped me just be less fragile, because there was a point where if I heard someone say the phrase person with autism, I would immediately go into this spiral of they must be thinking it must be about me, it must be they think that autism is something bad but it's not for me, and therefore what do I say? Should I confront them? Am I complicit in some sort of bad thing if I don't? And now I can hear that and I don't think twice about it because it's just a phrase. So that like shifting out of that mindset was tremendously helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there's not enough hours in the day, for me to think about such trivial matters. I mean,
Yeah,
honestly,
absolutely.
I hear you. I was going to ask you, you've written a bit about parents, and as you know, parents are the subject of sometimes really intense bullying by some of these high functioning individuals or neurodiversity activists. And of course, I've been on the receiving end of that as well. We have hundreds of comments and emails from people who've been bullied online.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, here's the thing, like, why? I in the world I live in, I mean, of course there are always exceptions, but the
Mhm.
world I live in, parents are really devoted to their kids. They really want to help their kids. Sure, we all make mistakes and we might do the wrong thing for a while, or we'll try different things. But parents are the main source of love, warmth, care, and support, right, for their children with disabilities, including autism. They're not evil people. Yeah, maybe they need some more information here and there. Who doesn't? We all do. What is up with that? I find it outrageous, to see these people vilifying us with actually no facts. It's not like they really know anything about us. Like, can you explain this to me, Lucy?
I think a big part of it is that once you're really in this like radical neurodiversity, a lot of it is on the internet, it's like internet community. They, I for a while was convinced like certain sources of information just could not be trusted. And so there are a few sites and like blogs. I think Neuroclastic is one of them, where they tend to write really like extreme um, characterizations of, someone writes a memoir about a child who's severely autistic, and then there's a review about how this person is, an evil monster, blah blah blah. And then I think that is the perception that people get. And there's also like a, boycott this book, boycott this movie. There's a lot of boycotting, which is, I'm in favor of engaging with ideas that you disagree with, not like pushing them to the side. So I think that at least some of the people who participate in this bullying are getting these grossly exaggerated and totally inaccurate like characters of the people they then bully. And I think that's got to be part of it. I think there's probably some element of, like it's pretty common to have a later diagnosis of autism after a life with a lot of struggles and being misunderstood. And so I think some people kind of project the anger that they have felt at perhaps the parents or other adults in their life, and they like see, parent says this about autism, immediately associate that with whatever negative memories they have or negative interpretations of a memory. And then that person becomes acceptable to hate them and treat them terribly. Those are my main kind of hypotheses. I also think if it weren't anonymous, it would happen a lot less.
Oh my gosh, I was just about to say that, because
Yeah.
almost always these trollish, really poisonous comments are from anonymous accounts. And in fact, I have some friends who work in social media. I mean, not surprising. I'm here in Silicon Valley like you are, right?
Yeah.
We know people in the business. And they've told me, like, Jill, I can't believe you even take this stuff seriously. They're like, most of those accounts are just duplicate accounts that they were telling me there are these things called like tweet deck or something. I don't know. I'm not very good on social media, but there a lot of them are duplicate accounts, and a lot of them are just fake. And my friends were like rolling their eyes when I was complaining about this stuff. They're like, but I'm like, but these people do have power. Like, on Twitter, it's
Yeah.
amazing. It's like this parallel universe where, some sort of cultural norms are kind of formed, for better or worse, probably for worse in this case.
Yeah.
But I do wonder about that too. Quite a bit of fakery. So I wanted to ask you, about like college life with autism. Now, I've been involved, I'm a Stanford grad, and I've been involved with, Stanford's autism stuff for quite a long time. And a couple of years ago, for example, they started something called the Stanford Neurodiversity Project, which I saw, as a good thing because they're trying to help people on campus, right, who need, social support or other supports and, therapeutic supports. More power to them. I'm wondering, we've seen in the past decade a complete explosion in the number of students, with autism. And I'm curious, what has your experience been as a student on the spectrum? What have you seen that's good or bad on campus? I can imagine that for many students, and you're particularly hyper intelligent, for a lot of students, it could be very challenging.
Yeah, I think I've had a really good experience in college. The neurodiversity program, I actually got to do, they launched like the summer before I started, which was really good timing. And they had a transition orientation, which was really useful. The new student orientation is like 3 days of sensory chaos, a billion new people running in every different direction, a bunch of surprise events that no one told you about because it's going to be fun if you don't know it's coming, and like screaming in auditoriums. So you can imagine how I actually hid for most of that. But the transition orientation, it was like a student who had just graduated who was autistic kind of gave like the Asperger's tour of Stanford. It's like, this place is loud, this place is pretty loud, this place is like a little less loud. I haven't been anywhere else because I only like to go to 3 places each day, but just kind of showed us the ropes, and that was tremendously helpful because transitions are hard. I've never had a problem with academic accommodations. I'm very grateful for modern technology. There are times when I get so overwhelmed I can't really talk, and then I have my iPad talk for me, and I do it in like a South African accent, so people usually find it amusing and not too weird.
Really, there's sometimes you can't talk, you just find yourself.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. What's that like? Is it an anxiety response? Like, what is it?
It's anxiety. It's also, I think that this is something I learned my freshman year. Like when I have sort of sensory input that accumulates throughout the day, and this was a lot worse when I was living in a much louder dorm, I just reach a point of like overwhelm where I'm not necessarily anxious about something, but it's kind of, my brain sort of shuts down and it's very hard for me to think clearly or communicate. And with anxiety, it gets to a point sometimes where I'm experiencing like pseudo psychotic symptoms and very disorganized thoughts, and just and so I've gotten a lot better at avoiding those situations. But the iPad helps a lot when I need to contribute to a conversation.
Wow. Okay, that's really interesting. So in closing, what advice do you have for us, as severe autism champions, as severe autism moms? I always think, what's a productive use of our energies and time in terms of really advocating for our kids, in this context, right, where there's so much, sugar coating of autism, so much hyping of something that has nothing to do with our reality. You're a sage youngster. What advice do you have for us families who are really trying to improve the world for our kids?
I mean, I think a lot of the NCSA stuff I see happening is wonderful. I think that, I mean, my general advice would be keep doing what you keep advocating, keep fighting for awareness. It's easier said than done, but bear in mind that a lot of the trolls are apparently duplicate accounts. I didn't know that, but I think like having the courage to continue in spite of all that pushback is really admirable. I think I wish I had like a more novel or encouraging note to end on. I guess my one other thing is I think there's some sort of generational thing that's happening. We're in like a cultural moment where my generation is super into this like social justice advocacy. And I don't think it's going to last forever. I think that the generation of kind of higher functioning autistic people are going to get older and become more mature and start to appreciate more nuances, and then become less radical. And I'm hoping to help that trend along. So I guess that would be the other thing. I don't know if it's advice, but my tentative prediction is that this moment isn't going to last forever. So, stay the course. And I really admire what all of you are doing.
Well, Lucy, thanks so much. I really appreciate your unflagging honesty about things. Maybe that's part of your autism, right?
Possibly.
You really tell it like it is and how you see the world. And I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that you are going to change the world for the better, no matter what you choose to do. You're an amazing person. I'm glad I got to talk to you like live rather than through email. This has been a pleasure.
Nice.
It's great. And I hope we keep in touch. You said you have 2 more years at Stanford, or I guess 1.5 years now, or a year and a bit.
2 more years. I'm a sophomore now.
Oh, you're a sophomore now. Okay. Oh, good. Okay. So we have you around. So
yes.
Good. So maybe we can keep in touch and have you back on the podcast or have you write for us again or anything. We're very open to it. And we really appreciate all that you've done for us so far. So thank you so much, Lucy. Any last words?
No, thank you for having me. This was really interesting.
Okay, thanks. I will stop recording. Thanks for tuning in to Autism Confidential. If you'd like to learn more, share an idea for an episode, or become a sponsor, please visit us at autismconfidential.org. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual speakers. Content presented is for informational purposes only, and we do not provide any medical or legal advice.